This podcast represents a brief history of the law relating to the issues raised. This should not be relied on as a substitute for professional advice. Specific legal advice should always be sought in relation to any particular circumstances, and no liability will be accepted for any losses incurred as a result of reliance on this podcast by those relying solely on this podcast. Welcome now to Hicksons Health Hour, the podcast series that explores a variety of current legal health topics. Throughout each episode, hear from different members of our health team with expertise in the area.
The refusal of consent to treatment is an area of medicine and law which raises a whole myriad of legal, ethical and moral issues. It raises questions about the appropriateness of the intervention of the courts, the right to self-determination, and the importance of the principle, the sanctity of life. We have recently seen the interplay of these issues in the Supreme Court of New South Wales decision of Hunter New England Local Health District and JI and others, a matter which concerns Jehovah's Witnesses and the refusal to consent to blood transfusions. Joining me to discuss today is Christina Vorillas, an associate in our health team here at Hicksons. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks, Meesha. To begin, we'll be looking at the decision of Hunter New England Local Health District and JI and others. By way of background, a 3-year-old girl known as JI was born with a range of serious medical conditions, including renal abnormalities, cardiac defect, and developmental dysmorphism without a unifying genetic diagnosis. These conditions meant that JI suffered from several medical complications, such as malrotation and twisting of the intestines, an anterior abdominal wall hernia defect, and was dependent on tube feeding, which required regular replacement. JI's parents were cooperative in the ongoing medical treatment of their daughter. They had consented to JI undergoing 2 surgeries that had been recommended by her treating specialist and her medical team. The first operation involved repairing the hernia, an abdominal wall defect, and the second operation involved the insertion of a feeding gastrostomy or surgical duodenostomy. The evidence indicated that JI's treating specialist and her medical team had been sensitive to her parents' wish to avoid treating their daughter with blood or blood products due to being Jehovah's Witnesses. JI's medical providers had considered and continued to take steps to exhaust all alternative treatments and adopt a blood conservation strategy in the course of the 2 surgeries and as part of JI's recovery. Regardless of this, the evidence of JI's treating specialist was that it may be clinically necessary to treat JI with blood and or blood products in connection with the 2 surgical procedures to manage the risk of her health, including the risk of death. An application was brought by the Hunter New England Local Health District for an order authorising the provision of blood transfusion procedures in relation to the 2 surgeries to be performed on JI. The application was made on the basis that JI's parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and as a result of their faith and religious beliefs, they would not consent to their daughter receiving blood or blood product transfusions in connection with the 2 proposed surgeries.
So the question before the court was whether JI's medical team could treat her with blood products without parental consent or an order from the court.
That's correct. The LHD's application to the court invoked. The court noted that the power of the court under that jurisdiction to make orders, including where the parents of a child have not consented to medical treatment, is well established. The court further noted that on such an application, the overriding criterion to be applied by the court is the best interest and welfare of the child. Further, the court noted that the role of the court on an application such as this is to exercise an independent and objective judgment so as to balance the advantages or disadvantages of the medical procedure under consideration. The strongly held religious views of JI's parents were factors which the court took into consideration. However, Justice Henry was satisfied that the court should grant the relief sought by the plaintiff. Based on medical evidence and submissions made by the parties, His Honour considered that this was a case where it was clearly in JI's best interests and welfare to authorise the proposed treatment in advance of her 2 surgeries. Relevant factors that were taken into account by the court included consideration of the nature of the medical condition and treatment, the reasons for the treatment, the risk to JI's health, and with and without the proposed treatment, the alternative courses of treatment that were available, the views and faith of JI's parents and the views of the treating doctors.
Okay, so what about an instance where the child is older and is also refusing blood transfusion treatment on religious grounds?
Yes, earlier Supreme Court of New South Wales decision, Royal Alexandra Hospital and Joseph and others, the plaintiff being the Royal Alexandra Hospital for Children, invoke the parents' patriae jurisdiction of the court in respect to a child referred to as Joseph. Joseph and his parents were Jehovah's Witnesses and, according to their faith and religious beliefs, would not undergo blood transfusion treatments. Joseph was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in March 2005 and had been attending the oncology unit of Royal Alexandra Hospital for treatment. Despite receiving that treatment, his red cell count and platelet count had both fallen and were both life-threatening low. Joseph had a very rapid heartbeat and signs of fluid in his lungs had been detected for the first time that morning, indicating that he was in early high output cardiac failure. Joseph's attending medical officer was of the opinion that Joseph was very likely to die of heart failure and or have a serious or fatal intracerebral hemorrhage within the next 48 to 72 hours if he did not receive transfer of red cells and platelets. The evidence indicated that once a transfusion had been given, a crisis of the current nature would be averted for up to 2 months and might not reoccur at all if Joseph's bone marrow recovered in time as was expected. Joseph's parents addressed the court. His father indicated that Joseph himself had made a statement in which he said he did not wish to receive a blood transfusion and his parents treated him as an adult. Joseph's mother asked if the plaintiff's application were to succeed, they be required to give any alternative treatment before the blood transfusion. However, there was no alternative treatment available. Justice Gazelle noted that what must guide the court in making a serious decision such as this in opposition to the parents and the child are the best interests of the child. His Honour had no doubt on the material before the court that it was in Joseph's best interest to have the blood transfusion. His Honour commented that Joseph would die otherwise and his life ought to be spared. Justice Gazelle rejected Joseph's wish that he not have the blood transfusion, notwithstanding that he was over 16 years old and his wishes had to be given serious consideration. He was still a child.
So essentially, medical practitioners are able to obtain an order from the court allowing them to treat children by way of blood products or transfusions, where there is no parental consent or it is against the wishes of the child on religious grounds, if that treatment is in the best interests and welfare of the child.
That's exactly right. In terms of takeaways, it is important to ensure that the appropriate consents are in place prior to undertaking treatment for a child. If a parent or guardian refuses to provide consent, but that treatment is in the best interest of the child, an order should be sought from the court.
Thanks, Christina.